We slept for hundreds of years, dreaming of a new home. But when we finally awoke, our dreams of peace were shattered.
Welcome back.
Mass Effect Andromeda, a game which EA had hoped would spawn a series to rival the originals, but that would never happen. With a cancelled DLC, a sequel put on ice, and the latest Mass Effect 5 trailers involving Liara and the N7, it seems that the Andromeda Galaxy was a bit too far of a reach. But, I mean, how did this happen? Well, I think to understand why this game seems to have failed as both an open world RPG and as a Mass Effect game, we've got to go back and find out what made the original Mass Effect games iconic. So I've gone through and found what I consider to be the most important factors in Mass Effect's success. And so yeah, I'm gonna be going through them.
This is Shepard. We need...
And, well, when looking at people's impressions of this game, the squad mates always seem to pop up, because the Mass Effect series managed to balance, around like 20 characters to a pretty intense degree, because when looking at rankings of these characters, while there are a few outliers who weren't the best, most of the characters are pretty interchangeable, because they're all fairly well written characters who have their personalities, motivations, and are quite interactive. And this is most evident in Mass Effect 2 with, just some absolutely amazing companion quests. And with some of these companions spanning over 3 games, you really get to learn a lot about them, which is helped heavily by the great voice acting in this game, and just allows a great sense of immersion.
I know what you did, Shepard.
And this factor of companions is massively paired with the ability to just kill them. Because, Mass Effect, one of the main things which is dropped in the Mass Effect Andromeda is that the originals allowed you to mould Shepard into what you want them to be. They could be a good old saviour helping everyone, or you could end up with a few genocides on your hands and murder all your helpers. And yeah, this ability to just mould the character into your own throughout a trilogy of games is not really something you see in modern RPG games, because it's much easier just to make one linear path without having any deviation. So it was nice to see in Mass Effect just the amount you can influence the actual game's events. And this is, of course, is until the end of Mass Effect 3, where it's just pick A, B or C and you're done. So apart from that, it's got incredible choice.
Anderson, what are you doing here? I didn't send...
What are you actually affecting? Well, fortunately in the trilogy of games, you can build a lot of background. And, Mass Effect has an abundance of species, factions, notable locations and conflicts between these factions. And this is helped by Mass Effect 1's heavy lifting of all this exposition, which has been rightfully criticised for. It was heavy-handed, but this allows the following 2 games to really take these conflicts into account and allow them to affect the game's events, especially in like Mass Effect 3, where you're forced to choose between different ideologies to get the forces to save Earth. You can't have your way with everything due to these conflicts which have been built up in the background throughout the other 2 games. speaking of saving the Earth, one thing which I think Mass Effect 3 did especially well was just the goddamn space battles. I mean, this trilogy, at the end of each of the games, there's a masterfully directed space battle, which is just a spectacle to watch. And it is boosted by the fact that you can see how your choices have affected the game in these space battles, in these cinematics. Your choices still affect the cinematics, which is very nice to see.
You're the new Pathfinder.
This is incredible.
And so that takes us to Mass Effect Andromeda, and why it failed. Because when you look at its initial trailers and teasers, they look solid. They got a good reception, and I mean they show a basic premise of the game, which is you're going to be going to the Andromeda galaxy, colonizing it in a new hostile environment. However, they didn't really represent what was actually happening at the studio at this point. Because, I mean, this game went through some development hell. And this mainly comes down to the fact that ideas were not sticking due to constantly changing leadership. As it seems for the first few years of its life, the game was set to have procedural generation, quite like in the way No Man's Sky has it, with hundreds of worlds which are pretty much full to explore and different for each playthrough. But when they were given their final engine, the Frostbite engine, it couldn't handle it. So this led to some aspects of the game not really changing, like the combat went along. It seemed to have gone along smoothly throughout the entire game, or not the entire game, the entire development, which shows it's one of its strongest features. But the story, apparently it barely got going until the end of development, because it's quite hard to make a story when you don't know what the actual world's going to look like and what you're going to have in it. So, I mean, yeah, because it was reported that throughout the 5 years of development, main story quests and primary side quests were only made in the final 18 months, which is, I mean, it shows, which we're going to go through later, but there is just a sense that it was rushed, because the story was rushed. So, yeah.
Understood. Eyes open.
Gil has tuned the Nomad perfectly for EOS.
Now, first, I'm going to go into the fact that it just isn't a very good open world game apart from Mass Effect, because, I mean, this could have been really good for the games to be actually open world, because it could have given it, its own identity apart from the main trilogy. Because although those games had some open spaces, like the Citadel, most of the time areas were mission specific. You went to a ship, you killed the people on it, did whatever, went off, you never went to that ship again. And yeah, whereas this open world, mainly due to the crazed development, it is just barren. It feels like you're playing the latest you sod. It feels like you're playing the latest Assassin's Creed game, where visually it looks pretty good, bar the bugs, which I'm not going to go into the bugs because I can't be asked. But it looked good, a big step up from the previous Mass Effect games. But there's really nothing special about it. It's just a frozen planet, a desert planet, a forest planet, no personality, no side quests, no interactivity, just barren. So you're just walking about with no aim. Whereas if you look at the most successful open world games, things like, let's say, your Breath of the Wild, your Elder Scrolls games, Fallout, apart from 76, these games all have, massive amount of just things to do. You can get lost in these open worlds with different side quests, people, factions. None of that is really in this game. Side quests are, well, they're just fetch quests really, apart from some like companion quests, but that's a given. So yeah, a pretty shit open world. But the game wasn't all terrible. I mean, as I said before, the thing which seemed to have survived the development cycle the best was the combat. And I would say it's the best in a franchise, as it is just very fluid and smooth. I mean, you do lose some things like the more detailed ability to give companions commands, which were in previous Mass Effect games, but it is still a step up from what could be very clunky in the previous games. And I would say the best part of these games is the moment-to-moment action against the Remnant. Those, especially the big flying sods, like the big flying worm thing. I don't know what the fuck they are, but you know, they're cool. They got good mechanics, fun to play against, and you can forget the god awful rest of the game. So yeah.
Come on! We have to find Varant!
We don't even know if this is the way.
Well, something has to go right! You take a risk for the right reason. It's supposed to work!
And yeah, so now that gets us into talking about why it failed just as a Mass Effect successor. And one factor into that is Mass Effect has always had a pretty decent storyline with, you know, it's mainly about, there is an overarching storyline with mini villains in between, but in Andromeda, well, there is an abundance of abandoned storylines which seem to just, I'm assuming this is due to the fact that the development was rushed, so they pushed these storylines which they would probably have hoped to finish in this game onto a potential sequel which has never come about. And it's also evident in the fact that the main storyline in Andromeda ends, I mean, just very anticlimactically and quickly. When I was playing, I thought I would still have a couple hours left, and just bam, main villain's dead and you're done. And if you go on to side missions, well, the companion missions can't hold shit against Mass Effects. And yeah, as I talked about before in the open world part, the actual side missions were mainly just fetch quests. But yeah, so about these unanswered plot lines, well, you got shit like what happened to the creator of the Remnant, who's the benefactor, what happened to the Quarian Ark. And I mean, as I said, these probably would have been answered in a sequel. And of course, the Quarian Ark, there was a DLC which was scheduled to be all about that, but this was cancelled due to the fact that it did shit. I mean, the sales weren't what EA expected, and the reviews were not very nice. So yeah, with these storylines not being settled, it just makes Mass Effect seem, you know, lazy, and it can't stand on its own due to it.
Admit it, Commander. You'll miss me. Not at this range, I won't.
And now talking about the factions in the world and the different species, well, you'd think that if you go into a new galaxy, you'd have an abundance of a new species and locations to explore, but that doesn't happen. There's only 2 new species in Andromeda, and only one of them you actually interact with and can kind of like see their worlds and culture, which just feels like a big downgrade from the original Mass Effect games. And yeah, as I said, while Mass Effect 1 is very exposition heavy, that's still preferable to just a complete sparsity of it. And yeah, this is also just true with the fact that I can't even remember the names of these 2 species, but the evil ones, let's say, you are given bits of information, like the fact that they're conquering from an outside, from what seems like a different galaxy, maybe? Is that what I grasped from it? And the fact that the general, the main villain guy, is going rogue from the rest of his people. But I'm sure this would have been fleshed out in sequel games, but that hasn't happened. And I mean, if we go on to companions, I mean, it's clear these are some of the weakest in the game, or not in the game, in the Mass Effect series, because if you look at rankings which include them, they are mainly all of them in the lower quarter. And this is, I think just the fact that they are quite uninspired and bland due to the original cast. But yes, again, this could have been fixed maybe if you had more games to flesh them out. But yeah, the first impression of this game was so shit that it killed any chance of that.
Just voice your endorsement into my console.
I'm Commander Shepard, and this is my favorite store on the Citadel.
But, I mean, for the Mass Effect franchise, it's not all doom and gloom, because although games like this have been the death sentence for some franchises, like we saw that with Dead Space until recently, that had a poor third game and it killed off the franchise. It seems like Mass Effect still's got some kick in it, because there's a new game set to launch sometime in 2025. I mean, it's meant to be entering active development or main development, I believe late 23 or maybe sometime in 2023. It's meant to be entering heavy development, and yeah, it appears that they have left the Andromeda franchise with this game, because all of the teasers and trailers were of the Milky Way and Liara. So yeah, and that paired along with the fact that the Mass Effect Legendary Edition was a much bigger success than EA thought it would be, seemed to have reinforced with EA the fact that single player games are sellable. Because before Legendary Edition and some game like I think it was Jedi Fallen Order, EA, I mean, you wouldn't ever expect them to release another single player game. But yeah, so it seems like there will be more Mass Effect games, and they will be staying away from Andromeda for the near future. So yeah, that's that. A bit of a different video from the ones I made before. I mean, yeah, so I don't care, but if you do a favour and subscribe, I'll get to 10 soon. Woo! Fuck you now. This is barren. Yeah, I don't know why I'm still talking. See ya.